My fiancé looked at me and said, "Before we get married, I want a prenup that protects everything I earn. If this marriage ever ends, I don't want to lose a single penny." I just shrugged and told her, "Go ahead, draw up whatever agreement you want." She walked away believing she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. But a few months later, while sitting in her attorney's office, she discovered a clause she'd completely overlooked. The second her lawyer explained what it actually meant, all the confidence disappeared from her face, replaced by pure panic. "My name is Ethan. I'm 34 years old, and about 6 months ago, my fiancé demanded a prenup that would protect every dollar she owned." The funny part was that she had no idea I'd quietly built something worth far more than she ever imagined. When her attorney finally broke down what she'd signed, she realized her plan to shield herself from me had blown up in her own face. Vanessa and I had been together for 2 years and engaged for 4 months. We first crossed paths at a friend's wedding when I was 32 and she was 30. She worked in pharmaceutical sales and earned great money, around $150,000 a year once bonuses were included. She was incredibly ambitious, always chasing the next promotion and constantly talking about her long-term financial goals. At first, I admired that about her. There's something attractive about someone who's motivated. As for me, I worked in the tech industry, although not in the glamorous way people usually picture. I'm a software architect with a stable income of roughly $140,000 a year. Paid well, but it wasn't the kind of job that impressed people at parties. What Vanessa never knew, mostly because I never felt the need to brag about it, was that I'd spent the previous 6 years building a software business on the side. I developed a SaaS platform during nights and weekends. It began as nothing more than a hobby, but over time it slowly grew into a legitimate business. By the time we got engaged, that platform was bringing in around $400,000 a year in revenue while costing very little to operate. Instead of paying myself a huge salary, I quietly reinvested most of the profits back into the company so it could keep growing. I lived a simple life, drove an ordinary car, and never showed off my financial success. That business was my safety net, my retirement plan, and something I was deeply proud of, even though I never felt the need to advertise it. Vanessa knew I had a side project. She'd seen me working on my laptop in the evenings and understood that I owned a small software company. But she never seemed interested enough to ask questions or learn what it actually did. Her attention was always on her own career, her own paycheck, and her own financial independence. About 6 months ago, roughly 2 months after our engagement, she finally brought up the idea of a prenup. We were having dinner at her apartment, and I noticed she'd been unusually quiet throughout the evening. Finally, she looked at me and said, "I need to talk to you about something." I nodded. "Sure. What's going on?" "I've been thinking a lot about marriage, our finances, and what happens if things don't work out." "Okay. I want us to sign a prenup before we get married. I want legal protection for everything I own and everything I earn." Then she added, "If we ever get divorced, I don't want to lose a single cent." I slowly put my fork down and looked at her. "You're planning for a divorce before we've even gotten married?" She shook her head. "No, I'm just being realistic. I've worked too hard to build what I have. I've watched too many friends go through divorces and lose half of everything they earned. I'm not willing to let that happen to me. I need you to agree to a prenup where everything stays separate. What's mine stays mine, and what's yours stays yours." "So, you don't trust me?" She sighed. "This isn't about trust. It's about protecting myself. It's just smart financial planning." "And what happens if I refuse?" She didn't hesitate. "Then I can't marry you. This isn't something I'm willing to compromise on, Ethan. I need this protection." I thought about her demand for maybe 10 seconds before answering. Then I smiled and said, "Fine. Draw up whatever agreement you want. If signing a prenup is what makes you feel secure, then we'll sign one." She looked almost shocked by how quickly I agreed. "Really? You're actually okay with that?" "Yeah," I said. "If keeping everything separate makes you comfortable, then that's what we'll do. Your money stays yours. My money stays mine. Whatever gives you peace of mind." She smiled with obvious relief. "Thank you." I know some men get offended by this kind of thing, but I really need to protect myself. I understand, I replied. Have your attorney prepare the paperwork. I'll have my lawyer review it before I sign. She wrapped her arms around me and looked genuinely happy that I'd agreed without putting up a fight. What she didn't realize was that I had absolutely no problem keeping our finances separate. Honestly, I preferred it that way. About a week later, her attorney sent over the first draft of the prenup. It was 20 pages long and packed with legal language. The overall message was simple. Everything either of us owned before marriage would remain separate. Every dollar earned during the marriage would stay with the person who earned it. Neither of us could seek alimony. Retirement accounts, investments, and personal assets would stay completely separate. Basically, she kept everything that belonged to her, and I kept everything that belonged to me. I forwarded the document to my attorney, David, the same lawyer who handled my business contracts. After reading through it, he gave me a call. This is a pretty aggressive agreement, he said. She wants total financial separation. Yeah, I answered. That's exactly what she asked for. And you're really okay with that? Completely. Actually, I'd like you to add one more clause. What kind of clause? I want language stating that any business or investment owned before the marriage, or started during the marriage, remains the sole property of the person who created it, including all future income, ownership, and equity connected to that business. He paused for a second. So you want to protect your software company? Exactly. If she wants complete financial protection, then I want the same thing. I want to make sure no one can ever claim ownership of my business. David nodded. That's perfectly reasonable. I'll add it. Anything else? Yeah, one more thing. I also want a financial disclosure clause. If either one of us hides assets or lies about our financial situation, the entire prenup becomes invalid. He sounded curious. Why do you want that? Because if I'm signing something this strict, I want both of us to be completely honest about what we own. Seems fair, he replied. I'll include it. Just remember, she'll have to agree to those changes. I smiled. She wants this prenup badly enough that she'll agree to anything that sounds reasonable. David added both clauses and sent the updated version back to Vanessa's attorney. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. My lawyer said your changes look fine. We can sign everything next week. She never even asked what those changes actually were. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't carefully reading the agreement anymore. She was so focused on protecting herself that she assumed any revisions I requested were simply meant to protect me in the same way. She wasn't wrong. She just had no idea how much those changes actually protected me. 3 weeks later, we officially signed the prenup. Both attorneys were there as we initialed every page and signed the final documents. Vanessa looked completely satisfied. She even seemed relieved. She believed she'd secured complete financial protection from me. What she didn't understand was that I'd walked away with exactly the same protection. The difference was that I had far more to protect than she'd ever imagined. Update 1. For months after signing the prenup, we got married. The ceremony was beautiful, plenty of friends and family showed up, and the reception was every bit as expensive as Vanessa wanted it to be. She insisted on paying for the reception herself because she wanted everything to be perfect and hoped to impress her coworkers and relatives. I didn't have any problem with that. It was her money, so it was her decision. Once we were married, we followed the prenup exactly as it was written. We opened a joint account for household bills and each contributed the same amount every month. Other than that, everything stayed separate. Our personal savings, investments, and income remained completely independent. Vanessa seemed perfectly happy with that setup. Whenever she received a bonus at work, she'd immediately move the money into her own investment account. She never talked to me about it, and she never asked what was happening with my finances. We were husband and wife, but financially we lived almost like two separate people. About 3 months into our marriage, something huge happened. A larger tech company approached me about buying my software business. They didn't purchase the whole company, though. Instead, they bought a 60% ownership stake for $8 million while I kept the remaining 40% and agreed to stay on as a consultant. I didn't tell Vanessa right away. It wasn't because I was trying to hide anything. Honestly, I was still trying to wrap my head around it myself. I'd spent 6 years building that company from scratch, and overnight all that work had finally paid off in a way I never imagined. There were lawyers to meet with, accountants to consult, taxes to figure out, and major decisions to make about my remaining ownership. About 2 weeks after the deal officially closed, I finally brought it up. We were eating dinner at home while Vanessa was excitedly telling me about a major sales deal she just closed at work. "That's awesome," I said. "I've got some good news too." She smiled. "Oh yeah? What happened?" "My software company was acquired." She looked up from her plate. "Your side project?" "Yeah. A tech company bought a majority stake." "Oh, that's nice." Then she casually asked, "How much did they pay?" $8 million for 60%. She froze. The fork stopped halfway to her mouth as she stared at me in complete disbelief. $8 million? Yeah. I kept the other 40%, so the company was valued at roughly $13 million overall. My portion of the sale came to about $8 million. She blinked several times. "So, you have $8 million? After taxes, it'll probably be closer to $5 million. But yeah, roughly." She continued staring at me. "And you didn't think this was something you should mention?" "I am mentioning it. The transaction only closed 2 weeks ago. I've spent those 2 weeks dealing with attorneys, accountants, and all the paperwork." I could practically see her trying to process everything. "So you've secretly been running a multimillion-dollar company this whole time?" I shook my head. "It wasn't a secret. I told you from the beginning that I owned a software business. You just never asked any questions." She frowned. "Because I thought it was some little side project. I had no idea it was worth millions." "It wasn't worth millions when we first met," I explained. "It grew over the years. I kept reinvesting the profits instead of pulling money out. I built it little by little." She looked at me carefully. "So how long have you known it was worth that much?" I honestly didn't. Not until someone actually made an offer to buy it. It's hard to know what a private company is worth until the market tells you. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "This changes everything." I looked at her. "What exactly does it change?" "Our financial situation. Our prenup was negotiated based on the income you disclosed. You made it sound like you earned $140,000 a year. I do earn about $140,000 a year. That's my salary from my regular job. The business income was separate. And according to the prenup, that business belongs entirely to me and can't be claimed by anyone else." She shook her head. "You should have told me." "Why? You were the one who insisted on complete financial separation. You pushed for that. You got exactly what you wanted. That's not fair." "It actually is. You wanted a prenup that protected every dollar you earned because you didn't want to lose a single cent." I agreed. "And that exact same agreement protects everything I earn, including my company." For the first time, she had absolutely nothing to say. The rest of dinner passed in complete silence. Update 2. Over the next week, Vanessa became more and more frustrated about the acquisition. She brought it up almost every single day. She accused me of hiding things from her. She insisted the prenup needed to be rewritten. And she kept saying it wasn't fair that I now had millions of dollars she couldn't touch. I gave her the same answer every time. "I didn't hide anything. You knew I owned the business. You simply never cared enough to ask about it. And remember, the prenup you insisted on specifically protects business income. That was one of the clauses my attorney added, and your lawyer approved it." She looked irritated. "I didn't read every little detail." I shrugged. "That's not my responsibility. You wanted a prenup. You hired an attorney. Your lawyer reviewed every page. And then you signed it. Everything about it is legal. And it's fair. We should renegotiate it." I looked at her. "Why would I agree to that? The agreement protects both of us equally. You keep every dollar you earn. I keep every dollar I earn. That's exactly what you asked for. But I didn't know. Didn't know what? That I could end up being successful? That my business might eventually become valuable? You assumed you'd always make more money than I did. You assumed you'd always be the higher earner. Now you're upset because things turned out differently. She hated hearing that. But she also knew I wasn't wrong. She'd pushed so hard for that prenup because she believed she'd always be the one with more money. She wanted protection from me. It never crossed her mind that one day I might need protection from her instead. About a month after I told her about the acquisition, she came home with another announcement. I've scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. I want to review the prenup. I think we may have legal grounds to change it. I looked at her. Based on what? Financial disclosure. You didn't properly disclose how much your business was worth. I disclosed that I owned a software company. It's listed in the prenup. The company increased in value after we signed. That's not the same thing as lying. My lawyer believes we have a case. I couldn't help smiling. Your lawyer gets paid by the hour. Mine doesn't think you'll win. But if you want the meeting, let's have it. I'll bring my attorney too. Update 3. 2 weeks later, all 4 of us met at Rebecca's law office. There was Vanessa, her attorney Rebecca, my lawyer David, and me. We sat around a conference table with copies of the prenup spread out in front of everyone. Rebecca opened the discussion. We've requested this meeting because my client would like to discuss modifying the prenuptial agreement she signed with Mr. Ethan. David folded his hands. And on what legal basis? Rebecca answered confidently. We believe Mr. Ethan failed to accurately disclose his financial circumstances before the agreement was signed. The prenup was negotiated with the understanding that his annual income was approximately $140,000. He failed to reveal that he owned a business worth millions. David calmly shook his head. That's not correct. The prenup specifically states that Ethan owns a software company. It's listed clearly in the asset disclosure section. He flipped directly to page 8 and pointed at the relevant paragraph. I watched Rebecca read it. As her eyes moved across the page, I could see her expression begin to change. It says he owns a software company, she admitted. But it doesn't state the company's value. David nodded. It didn't have to. At the time the agreement was signed, the estimated value was around $2 million based on its revenue. Since then, the company has grown substantially and was partially acquired. Those events all happened after the prenup was executed, which means they have no bearing on the original agreement. Rebecca quietly flipped through the remaining pages. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Vanessa sitting beside her, looking more uncomfortable with every passing minute. David calmly continued, "There's another important section you should look at, Clause 14 on page 11. He turned the document toward everyone at the table. It clearly states that any business or investment owned before the marriage, or created during the marriage, remains the exclusive property of the person who started it. That includes every dollar of income, ownership interest, and future equity connected to that business." Then he looked directly at Rebecca. "My client specifically requested this clause, and you approved it before the agreement was signed. Your client agreed to those terms." Vanessa leaned over and carefully read the paragraph herself. I watched the expression on her face slowly change as the meaning finally sank in. David wasn't finished. And I'd also like to draw everyone's attention to Clause 16. He flipped a few more pages. This is the financial disclosure provision, another clause my client requested. It states that if either party intentionally hides assets or misrepresents their financial situation, the entire prenup becomes invalid. My client didn't misrepresent anything. He disclosed that he owned a software company. The fact that the business later increased in value isn't financial deception. David paused for a moment before opening a folder he'd brought with him. That said, since financial disclosure has become today's topic, I've also reviewed Mrs. Ethan's financial records. The room immediately became tense. "Vanessa," David asked, "did you disclose the inheritance you received from your grandmother?" The color instantly drained from her face. "What inheritance?" Rebecca asked. David answered without hesitation. "The $300,000 inheritance Mrs. Ethan received 2 years ago after her grandmother passed away. It's currently sitting in an investment account under her maiden name. That inheritance existed before the marriage and should have been listed as a premarital asset in the prenup. It wasn't." Rebecca slowly turned toward Vanessa. "Is that true?" Vanessa didn't say a word. After a long silence, David continued. "If that's accurate, then under Clause 16, the very clause my client requested, the prenup would become void because of financial misrepresentation." David remained calm. Whether the agreement would ultimately be enforced or not would be decided by a court. Litigation would be expensive, unpredictable, and could take years. He looked directly at Rebecca. "Neither side benefits from turning this into a legal battle. My client has no interest in challenging the agreement, and I suspect your client doesn't either." Rebecca stayed silent. David continued. "The fact remains that your client failed to disclose a premarital asset while accusing my client of failing to disclose his own finances. That significantly weakens the argument that she entered this agreement without full knowledge." He closed the folder. "If everyone truly wants the prenup to remain in force, the simplest solution is to leave it exactly as it is." I watched Vanessa's entire expression collapse. She'd walked into that meeting hoping to break open the prenup and gain access to my money. Instead, she'd accidentally revealed an undisclosed asset of her own. By doing that, she'd put the very agreement she'd fought so hard for at risk. Ironically, she'd walked into that meeting hoping to strengthen her case, but ended up undermining it instead. Nobody spoke for several long moments. Finally, Rebecca cleared her throat. "I need a few minutes alone with my client." David and I quietly left the conference room and waited in the lobby. About 20 minutes later, someone called us back inside. When we returned, Vanessa's eyes were red. It looked like she'd been crying. Rebecca spoke in a noticeably colder tone. "My client is withdrawing her request to modify the prenuptial agreement. She accepts that the agreement remains valid as written." David smiled politely. "Excellent. I also want the record to reflect that my client has no intention of pursuing the financial disclosure issue. As long as the prenup remains intact and isn't challenged further, he's perfectly satisfied." The meeting ended there. Vanessa drove herself because she'd come directly from work, so we left separately. By the time I got home, she was already sitting quietly on the couch waiting for me. She looked up and asked one simple question. "You knew about my inheritance?" I nodded. Before signing a legal agreement, I did my due diligence. "So yes, I knew." She stared at me. "You could have told me." "I could have. But you were the one who wanted complete financial separation. Your inheritance was your business. I had no intention of interfering with it." She narrowed her eyes. "You kept it in your back pocket as leverage." I shook my head. "No. I kept it as protection. You wanted a prenup that protected you from me. I simply made sure it protected me from you too. That's the entire purpose of a prenup." She was quiet for a while before asking, "So, what happens now?" I answered honestly, "Nothing changes. The prenup stays exactly as it is. Your money remains yours. My money remains mine. That's exactly the arrangement you wanted." She hesitated before asking another question. "And what if I decide I want a divorce?" "Then we get divorced. The prenup already covers that. No alimony. A clean split. We each leave with what belongs to us." She sat there silently, trying to process everything. Finally, she looked at me and said, "You played me." I shook my head. "No. I gave you exactly what you asked for. You wanted financial protection. You got it. I simply made sure I received the same protection. That's not playing games. That's just being careful." Final update. 3 months have passed since that meeting. We're still legally married. But our marriage doesn't feel the same anymore. There's a distance between us now that didn't exist before. Sometimes I catch Vanessa looking at me differently, almost like she's still trying to understand how she misread the situation so badly. Our financial arrangement hasn't changed. We still keep separate accounts. We still split household expenses evenly. The difference is that we both know the balance of power isn't what she always believed it was. She entered this marriage convinced she was the primary breadwinner. She thought she was the one who needed financial protection. Finding out that I owned substantially more than she did completely changed the way she viewed our relationship. Last week she suggested we start seeing a marriage counselor. "I think we need help rebuilding trust," she told me. I looked at her. "I haven't broken your trust. I've been honest about everything. You're the one who failed to disclose an inheritance." She sighed. "You let me believe you earned less than you actually did." I shook my head. "I never told you I earned less. You assumed that. You never asked questions about my business. You never cared enough to learn the details. You were focused on your own income and making sure you were protected. I respected that. So I protected myself the same way." She sat quietly before finally asking, "So where do we go from here?" I answered the only way I could. "That's your decision. The prenup stays in place. Our finances remain separate. If you want to stay married, then we'll stay married. If you want a divorce, then we'll get divorced. But financially, nothing changes." She stared at me. "That's it? That's all you're going to say?" I shrugged. "What else is there to say? You insisted on a prenup because you wanted protection from me. I simply made sure it protected me too. The only reason you're upset now is because it works both ways. I honestly don't know what else to tell you." She quietly went upstairs to bed. I stayed awake for a long time thinking about everything that had happened. The truth is, I don't know if this marriage is going to survive. Looking back, I think Vanessa wanted financial protection because she never truly trusted me. She never fully saw me as an equal partner. Instead, she saw me as someone who might eventually become a financial threat. Then, the moment she discovered I was actually more successful than she wasn't proud of me. She wasn't excited for me. She was angry. She felt cheated because she hadn't known the full picture. To me, that revealed exactly what mattered most to her. It wasn't partnership. It wasn't supporting each other. It wasn't building a life together. It was about control, protection, keeping score. My name is Ethan. I'm 34 years old, and I married a woman who insisted on a prenup because she wanted protection from me. Then she became furious when that exact same agreement protected me from her. What I've learned is this. When someone is determined to protect themselves from you before the marriage has even begun, maybe they don't truly see you as a partner. Maybe they see you as a potential risk. And maybe she wasn't completely wrong to think that way. Because thanks to the prenup she demanded, if this marriage falls apart, and honestly I think it probably will, we'll each leave with exactly what we earned ourselves. Nothing extra. Nothing less. That's the arrangement she wanted from the very beginning. And in the end, that's exactly what she got. Edit 1. A lot of people have asked whether I intentionally hid the value of my company. The answer is no. I disclosed that I owned a software business in the prenup paperwork. Vanessa never asked about its revenue, valuation, or financial performance. I wasn't legally required to volunteer information she never requested. If knowing the company's value mattered to her, that was something her attorney should have investigated. Edit 2. People have also asked about the inheritance. Yes, I knew about it before we signed the agreement. I did my homework. The reason I never mentioned it was simple. The prenup she wanted already kept our assets completely separate. Her inheritance belonged to her. My company belonged to me. It only became relevant after she tried to invalidate the prenup by claiming there had been improper financial disclosure. Edit 3. For everyone wondering whether we're headed for divorce. Honestly, I don't know. Right now we're stuck in a strange kind of limbo. We're still husband and wife on paper, but financially we feel more like roommates than partners. Ever since that meeting with her lawyer, Vanessa has been distant. Sometimes I wonder if she's trying to decide whether staying married to someone whose money she'll never have access to is still better than being on her own. If that's really what our marriage has become, that's a pretty sad place for any relationship to end up.